Hey everybody, this is Vegan Theology with Kevin and Sarah Hale, episode 49.
Hello everyone, thanks for being here. And we are discussing Islam today, chapter 7 of Dr. Kemmer's book.
Yeah.
This is the last major world religion, the most recent one to enter the scene on the world stage.
And this is from Dr. Lisa Kemmer's book, Animals and World Religions. It's been a very interesting book.
Yes, really looking at the core teachings within each major world religion and what they say about God's creation, animals, our relationships with them.
Yeah.
What did you think about this chapter?
It was pleasantly refreshing. I just got the sense that this faith, the Muslim faith, was very compassionate. And I think what's surprising about that is the fact that in our country, at least, we've been programmed for so long about what Islam is and how most Muslims are, that to read this, it was very refreshing. I was like, wow, they are so compassionate. I mean, they're giving Christians a run for their money. They're just so compassionate according to their core teachings. I was like, what is going on? And I realized, oh yeah, we've been told. I approached this like I thought I knew something about Islam, and I really don't. I know we've studied things here and there, and I've opened up a Quran, years ago just to get a sense of it, but I just thought I knew something, and why would I think I know something about it when I've never really studied it? And I think it's because we've been told what to think about Muslims. I almost have some sort of, I don't know what the right word is. I was thinking about how to describe this, like a visceral reaction if someone who mentions Islam or Muslims. And I don't have that same reaction if somebody mentions Buddhists or Hindus or any other faith. And it almost undercuts my rational faculties. It's just I have a reaction. And the reaction's not necessarily even good or bad. It's just I have some sort of reaction I was noticing. Why is that? What is that? I think we need to do a little deprogramming.
Yep. We were talking before we sat down to record this. How much do we want to get into this? I was saying, I want to talk about this and I want to talk about that. We could spend the first 40 minutes of this episode just talking about this.
Right.
And we kind of decided, no, we're not going to go down that path, because right now our goal is to focus on Kemmer's book and do it justice and discuss what she's doing with this book.
Right.
But no, I was thinking the same things. There's definitely a deprogramming happening just by reading this book.
Right.
It's causing us to actually look at things that haven't intentionally been looked at.
Right.
Messages have gotten through. A lot of messages have been coming in our whole lives. There was 9/11, huge, and all the commentary after 9/11 and all the narrative after 9/11. And right after that, I read Ayaan Hirsi Ali's The Caged Virgin and Infidel, which made a huge impression on me.
Right.
I'm a little embarrassed to admit, we were watching the television series 24 with Kiefer Sutherland, right? Which had a very specific narrative about Islam.
Yeah.
But it was the politicians, it was the religious leaders, it was the stand-up comedians, it was everywhere you turn.
Right. It was the new atheists.
Yes.
Interestingly, many atheists who just had a problem with religion in general really went after Islam. And what we know is that they went after a specific point about Islam, or they emphasized one point and ignored all this other stuff about Islam. And you could do the same with Christianity, right? We've talked about it. You could hammer on the Inquisitions. You could hammer on the Crusades. You could say Christians are very violent in our history. Yeah. And we were. And we don't talk about that.
And we still are. If we were living in a Muslim country today, if we grew up in Yemen or Jordan or, name any of them, we would think that Christians are very, very, very violent.
Right.
Correct.
Violence. Whereas many Christians do not know. Anyway, it's just keeping things in perspective, and it's a matter of emphasis, I think.
Right. Because, I think we were just reading this morning, there are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. We hear about a certain faction in our news. We're not hearing about the billion of Muslims who are peace-loving.
The new atheists and all these atheists who want to talk about being rational and logical, they're talking about a fraction of people in this faith, and they're talking about possibly a sect of this faith. Like if you're running a bunch of big data and you wanted to do some analysis, a scientific, quote unquote, scientific analysis, you wouldn't make these broad conclusions. You wouldn't come to these broad conclusions based on a small fraction of data points. I was just thinking like, wow, it doesn't sound very logical or rational.
So yeah, more to be unpacked at some point.
Yes.
Let's get into this chapter. I wanted to read her introductory paragraph because there's a few things there that get us started on the right foot. The root of Islamic religious traditions lies in Saudi Arabia in the 7th century. The Quran, the word of Allah, God, recited by the Prophet Muhammad, is the most sacred and foundational Islamic text. Islamic sacred literature also includes the Tanakh/Old Testament and the New Testament. Islam accepts and incorporates into itself all antecedent prophets from the Jewish tradition as described in the Tanakh, as well as Jesus and his mother Mary from the Christian tradition. Islamic traditions hold Jesus and his mother to be prophets and moral exemplars. Just as much of the chapter on Judaism holds true for Christians, both the previous chapters contain much that is morally relevant for Islamic religious traditions. Islamic sacred writings add a host of moral exemplars and animal-friendly religious teachings to this already rich body of sacred writings that have their roots in the Middle East. So there's a few things there. The first thing is, let's talk about the word Allah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that word. There again, you hear someone refer to Allah, and similar to what you were saying, Kevin, there is a very difficult to explain visceral reaction when you hear someone refer to Allah. As a Christian, you're like, uh-oh, no, there's something contra here. There's something contra-Christian about to be said.
Right.
I think this is a really important point. She has a footnote for the word Allah that says, the word Allah simply means God. When Arabic-speaking Christians pray, they also use the Arabic word Allah. It's just another language word for God, as in Spanish, they pray to Dios. When we hear a Spanish speaker pray, adios, or alabaré a mi señor, or whatever they say, we don't immediately have this visceral reaction like, uh-oh, something anti-Christian, something, right. They're not praying to the real God, they're praying to a false God. But we do, okay, I'll just speak for myself. I have had that visceral reaction when I hear someone say Allah. When a Arabic speaker says Allah Akbar, that's been programmed into our minds as there's about to be an act of violence.
No, exactly. Exactly. You hear Allah Akbar. Exactly.
All it means is God is great.
I know.
It's a phrase of worship. Also, that Islam is very friendly and respectful of the Jewish prophets, the Jewish sacred texts, the Jewish religion, as well as the Christian sacred texts and Jesus. And I have had this impression in speaking with Muslims in my life. They don't have a lot of baggage against when you start talking about Jesus or when you start talking about the Bible, or they're like, yeah, we accept those too.
Right.
You know, and of course we would be like, well, you don't accept it the right way. And there's a lot to discuss there, but they're very friendly towards our texts.
Yeah. An interesting point you made, Sarah, is that the Quran is written in Arabic and it's still read and recited in Arabic, whereas many Christians do not speak Biblical Hebrew or Koine Greek or Aramaic, and we're reading translations. So we're another step removed from our text, and yet many Arabic speakers are reading their sacred text in their own language.
In the original language.
In the original language. And I was thinking about it because this is a point of contention for Christians, which we're going to get into. I think we're going to do an episode on textual criticism. And the whole concept of inspiration for us is based on the idea that the original manuscripts, which we refer to as the autographs, those are inspired. But all the copies and all the manuscripts that follow are not the inspired text. They're based on the inspired text. All our translations are based on the inspired text. Oh, and by the way, we don't know where the inspired texts are. I wonder, we should look it up. I wonder if the Quran, the original autographs, still exist somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah. Her first section in her chapters is sacred nature, sacred animals, and very similar to what we read in every other major religion. The natural world in Islam is thereby endowed with intrinsic value. All that has been created has inherent value because it is inseparable from the Creator.
The Quran describes nature as a masterpiece of the deity's creative effort, providing a vision of Allah's splendor. Whichever way you turn, there is the face of Allah. The Quran therefore invites people of faith to ponder nature and the universe, so that we might have an idea about God's existence and His presence. Muslims are invited to see and hear Allah in the natural world. There are signs, too, for those with a mind to understand. In the alternation of night and day, and in the gracious rain God sends from heaven to renew the face of the parched earth, and in the veering of the winds. The Quran exclaims, "Surely in the heavens and the earth there are signs for the faithful, in your own creation, and in the beasts that are scattered far and near. Signs for true believers, signs for men of understanding."
That was quoting from Quran 45, 1 through 8. So I was looking, the Quran has 160 chapters. I've heard many people say they've sat down and read the Quran like in one sitting. I still have yet to read the Quran, but as in other religious traditions, devout Muslims have often turned to wild places where they could live among wild animals and nature, where they could experience Allah through creation. Living among animals often led to an increased appreciation for the marvels of God's creation, and simultaneously brought the hearts of the faithful closer to animals. Most of these Islamic ascetics were Sufis. They were Islamic mystics. Sufism is an expression of Islamic spirituality, not a separate faith. She discusses the most well-known Sufi in the Western world, the Persian-Iranian poet Jalal al-Din Rumi. Rumi lived from 1207 to 1273, and he prolifically composed poems filled with imagery of nature, revealing his connection to Allah through the natural world. He states that all of the forms and the creatures have a purpose because they make Allah known to us. Beautiful.
Yeah, Rumi, we're aware of him.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in social media, his quotes, they're always very wise. And I guess I didn't know until now that he was a Sufi.
Right. Neither did I. German scholar Schimmel wrote more than 100 books on the subject of Islam and specialized in Sufi traditions. She observes among the Sufis, the whole creation is one great mirror, or a large number of mirrors reflecting God's overwhelming beauty.
Continuing on, other sacred writings also connect nature directly to the Creator. Hadith Qudsi offers the voice of Allah. I was a hidden treasure, and I wished to be known, so I created the world. In the words of renowned contemporary Muslim Turkish scholar Ibrahim Özdemir, Muslim thinkers regard nature as a sacred book. Just like the Quran, the universe reveals to us the existence of a sustainer and creator. Turkish Sufi master Bediüzzaman Said Nursi emphasized in his teachings that nature is most importantly a form of divine revelation. I think this is fascinating to me. I've always loved the concept of what we call natural theology or general revelation. And there are many times where I've wanted to just go deep into it and study it and figure out what can we know about God from the world and from, our rational faculties reasoning. But what has God revealed in his nature about himself? And I know Christians, we live to separate between general revelation and special revelation, that it's the sacred text that really tells us who God is. And we can't really, quote unquote, be saved unless we've been exposed to special revelation. But I know that there are some thinkers who think that maybe we're doing general revelation a disservice by overemphasizing special revelation. And I just love that they say this, that just like the Quran, the universe reveals to us the existence of a sustainer and a creator. The nature is almost like a sacred book.
Yeah.
I just love that idea.
Yes. That nature itself is a revelation about God. I love that as well. And because nature is sacred and belongs to God and matters to God, the Quran overtly teaches human beings to have a moral feeling of obligation toward the surrounding universe. The Quran teaches that a primary duty of humanity is to infuse the natural world with moral obligations and imperatives provided by Allah. Sounds very Jewish. It sounds very Christian. To infuse the natural world with transcendent or revealed ethics is the main purpose of man, according to the Quran.
Yeah.
Our job is to infuse the natural world with revealed ethics. That's our job. Nature has rights that must be respected, rights that are due the Creator. It's not just that we have responsibility to nature or rights that are due to nature. The rights and responsibilities are due to God, to Allah. Any privileges that humans have been given by Allah follow and do not precede responsibilities. Responsibilities come first. As part of the Creator's work, animals are explicitly included among God's miraculous signs. Every creature has a value all their own, a non-instrumental value. This is from Quran 69. The Creator did not bring the universe into existence specifically for human beings. And the earth has He spread out for all living things. Quran 55. Animals have as their birthright a share in the natural world, a right to a habitat in which they can find clean water and sustenance. Every individual comes from Allah, matters to Allah, and has value through the Creator. Every individual, whether dung beetle, dromedary, or Arabian angelfish, is a creature of Allah, and human beings will be held accountable. For Muslims, the preservation of species is of paramount importance. It is a religious duty. Richard Foltz, author of Animals in Islamic Tradition and Muslim Cultures, notes that when we destroy habitats and species, it is like burning the pages of the divine text.
Wow.
By which God makes it possible for us to know Him.
And that, to me, is the essence of it, right? If you spend time with an animal, you spend time in nature, and you really spend time, and you unplug, you could get to know God better. And how many people do we know, masters of meditation, that went off into nature and learned about God? And I just love that point there, that destroying nature is like destroying a sacred text.
Yes. Damaging the earth or any creature of the earth without necessity is disrespectful toward the Creator and disobedient. And this last paragraph in this section had something interesting that I wanted to bring out. The Quran beseeches, do not defile the good earth, hallowed as it has been, with bloodshed. Quran 7. That language reminded me so much of, we talk about Rilera a lot, dude. What Rilera brought out through our study of Leviticus in Lamb of the Free, that God talks about bloodshed as defiling the earth itself. Do you remember? And the only thing that can purge the land and bring the land back to purity is time away from the land. Yeah, this idea that in God's eyes, bloodshed defiles the very land that we're on. And that idea shows up in the Quran as well.
And I think I just want to emphasize what you started with when you were in that reading. You said, a quote here, to infuse the natural world with transcendent, revealed ethics is the main purpose of man, according to the Quran. And I mean, that is theology. That is the essence of theology. In the real world, we are to, in essence, take God's word and make it into something real.
Lived theology.
Live theology, practical theology.
Revealed.
We're supposed to make a difference based on God's word. I love the way that's written.
Her next section, Islamic philosophy and morality. Given the narrative we were raised with, this is very interesting to us. So her first little...
And by the way, I've so much in this highlighted. It's unbelievable. Like this.
It's like, where do we start?
No, I know.
Her first subheading under this is Prophet Muhammad. Yes, I want to know who this Prophet Muhammad was. So Muslim scholars collected and compared recorded accounts of the words and deeds of the Prophet Muhammad to be used as a supplementary guide for the faithful. Hadith, or tradition, which preserve the life and words of Muhammad as remembered by his followers and collected by scholars, are the most authoritative Muslim texts after the Quran. We get a lot of information about Muhammad through these traditions called the Hadith. Muhammad is the moral and spiritual exemplar for the Muslim world. People of faith are encouraged to imitate the life of Muhammad.
Muhammad lived in a community where a few were wealthy while most were poor. And social justice is one of the major themes of the Quran. In fact, he lived at a time when life in general, including the lives of animals, lacked value. Accounts of Muhammad's life demonstrate that he is one of history's most influential societal reformers, compassionate not only towards suffering and downtrodden people, but also towards suffering and downtrodden animals.
It is therefore not surprising that Muhammad loved animals and displayed great kindness to them and encouraged other Muslims to do likewise. Hadith emphasize compassion toward animals as a religious requirement. For example, when wiping the mouth of his horse with his own personal cloth, Muhammad's followers asked what he was doing. The Prophet admitted that Allah had reprimanded him for having neglected the same horse. Later, on seeing a man treating his camel roughly, the Prophet Muhammad reminded the man that, quote, it behooves you to treat the animals gently.
Muhammad's words and deeds often were designed to mitigate animal suffering and death at the hands of human beings. He encouraged riders to allow their camels to stop as needed and to travel in the cool of the night so that the journey might be made more quickly. He spoke against the use of wild animal skins, target practice on living creatures, and inciting animals to fight for human entertainment. He forbade either branding or hitting an animal in the face. Records indicate that the Prophet did not even allow the collection of eggs because such theft distressed a mother bird.
When Muhammad was asked whether there was a heavenly reward for good deeds done for animals, he duly noted that how we live, how we treat animals matters. Hadith teach that killing animals without justification is, quote, one of the major sins, and that acts of kindness and charity to animals will be rewarded by Allah. Muhammad recalled both a woman condemned for cruelty to a cat and a man blessed for saving a dog's life. In the Mishkat, a secondary source of Hadith, the Prophet states, quote, if anyone wrongfully kills even a sparrow, he will face God's interrogation. The Prophet taught that a good deed done for an animal is as good as doing good to a human being, while an act of cruelty to a beast is as bad as an act of cruelty to a human being.
Muhammad taught his followers that all creatures matter in their own right, and that our interactions with other creatures are of moral and spiritual importance. Hadith indicates that Muhammad viewed animals as members of their own communities, and also as individuals in their own right, due proper care and respect. The Prophet encouraged kindness and compassion, and taught his followers that how we treat animals, how we invest our time and money, are noted by Allah and will be a matter of considerable importance on the Day of Judgment.
He sounds like a pretty nice guy.
Yeah.
The fact that there's this much written about how we treat animals in the Hadith
Right.
is significant.
Right. And we're not even doing it justice here. I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah. Next little section is love and compassion. Islam shares the Judeo-Christian belief in a benevolent, all-powerful creator who placed people in dominion on the earth. That's from Quran 7. Allah personally beseeches followers to demonstrate patience and mercy. That's from Quran 90. And notes that any act of cruelty toward animals is strongly forbidden. Prevention of physical cruelty is not enough. Much more is required of Muslims. We must also consider the emotional needs of other creatures, mental cruelty is equally forbidden. Love is equally important in Sufi traditions. 20th century Turkish political activist Zaya Golkap expresses his understanding of love as a core of Allah. Quote, I do not worship God, but for his love. The prolific mystic Ibn Arabi, born in Spain in 1165, wrote of his love for all creatures, noting that love is the core of his faith. Love is his faith. Quote, my heart has opened unto every form. It is a pasture for gazelles, a cloister for Christian monks, the Kaaba for the pilgrim, the tables of the Torah, and the book of the Quran. I practice the religion of love.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. The sentence starting this says, Allah created the universe with the breath of compassion. And I love that quote, I practice the religion of love, and also that love is his faith. That's powerful. There's another one here that says, love is manifest in human actions. That's the essence of our faith. If you don't have love, all the rest of it's garbage.
I think we're done here. What else do we need to say?
I don't know. Let's wrap this up.
I didn't think we'd reach the end of our podcasting career so soon. I think that's it. Many stories of Islamic saints recall holy people helping animals in need. When the compassionate Sufi Saint Sofyan al-Tari, 8th century Iraq, came upon a bird who was trapped in a cage, fluttering and making a pitiful sound, he bought the bird and set her free. After the death of the saint, a voice issued from the tomb, God has forgiven Sofyan on account of the compassion he showed to his creatures. When Ibrahim al-Kawas, 9th century Iraq, noticed that a great lion was limping toward him in the desert, he helped the lion, who rolled over at the ascetic's feet, presenting a paw that was swollen and gangrenous. The saint lanced, drained, and bandaged the paw. The lion went his way, but soon returned with a cub, showing appreciation to the man who had relieved his suffering.
Well-known hadith remind believers that Muslims are required to provide for animals and to treat them decently. In the world of Islam, few acts of devotion carry the moral and spiritual weight of compassion. No matter how far one might have fallen from the straight path outlined by the Quran, hadith teach that the one with a heart filled with compassion and tenderness is likely to be spared. In one story, a woman is condemned for cruelty because she confines and starves a cat, while a prostitute who saw a dog panting, dying of thirst, on top of a well removed her boot, tied it to her head covering, and drew water for the dog. She was forgiven on this account. The Prophet encouraged caretaking across species and noted that those who give food from the heart will enter paradise with peace. This story is very interesting. You have, quote unquote, a sinner being compassionate toward an animal, and she's spared.
By that act of compassion, she is deemed righteous, basically.
Yeah.
And we know that female purity is of paramount importance in the Middle East. And so for a woman who was a prostitute to be deemed righteous because she showed compassion for a dying animal is really significant.
Yeah.
Humility and submission. The word Islam literally means submission. That's really interesting. Surrender to God's law. Humans may be ecologically dominant, but we are fundamentally an instrument of Allah's will. Many Muslims assert that humankind has no rights, only duties. We are to tend rather than exploit, to assist rather than dominate, and our very salvation is dependent on an attitude and actions that demonstrate submission to Allah.
I love this opening point here by a contemporary Syrian-born Islamic scholar, Abdul Aziz Saeed. He says, a Muslim's approach to the natural world is a spiritual matter. I mean, to me, that speaks to stewardship. That speaks to God's peaceful kingdom. That speaks to everything. How we approach the natural world is a spiritual matter. In essence, everything is.
And the next section, vice regency.
And isn't that interesting? Vice regency. We've talked about being a viceroy and a vice regent.
Mm-hmm. As Allah's servants, we are charged with vice regency. As Allah's caretakers, Humans are accountable before God, and the proper human role is that of conscientious steward. Woo. Tending animals as Allah's vice regents is an act of religious devotion, an act of submission to Allah. As vice regents, humans will be held accountable. In the turmoil of the Great Flood, Allah saved every species, Quran 11, and humans are now obligated to tend, protect, and preserve these animals, maintaining the bounty that Allah has created, and to restore species that we have driven to the brink of extinction.
Wow, it sounds familiar, doesn't it? As an exercise, we should read Genesis, and where it says God, we should just put in Allah.
I know. No, this is one of the things I've been thinking through. I'm asked to lead our church family in prayer sometimes on Sunday morning during our worship service. And I have thought, what would it be like to get up and pray to Allah? How would that go over? Once in a while, we sing worship songs in Latin. Once in a while, we sing worship songs in Spanish.
Right.
And I always enjoy that because it reminds me that God is not contained in the English language.
That would be funny. Might be a few heart attacks.
The following section is zakat, which is almsgiving and service. Islam carries a sense of communal ownership of what is vital to common life. Among Muslims, the community has not only a stake in, but also a claim on every individual's material wealth.
Interesting.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I remember my first exposure to this as a child, watching the movie The Black Stallion, where they get an Arabian horse. I remember as a child learning the message from that movie that if you're in an Arabian culture, you're going to be treated very well as a guest. They will give you everything. They will give you the best of what they have, and they won't take no for an answer. You hear this from people who experience Middle Eastern culture. And this butts up against American Christian capitalism. This sounds so socialist. This sounds so communist.
Right.
It's part of their religion that everybody has a claim on everyone's individual wealth. It's a very communal way of looking at the world. So consequently, one of the fundamental pillars of the Islamic faith is zakat, or almsgiving. Zakat, an institution which undergirds a whole philosophy of social responsibility, is considered an act performed for God, an act that purifies those who share wealth, resources, or time with those in need.
Almsgiving is obligatory, and it is not limited to care for human beings. The Prophet commented that planting a tree or cultivating land that provides food for a bird, animal, or man is charity and satisfies the requirement of zakat. Those who provide food for animals give a charitable gift that yields great rewards from above.
Islamic religious traditions teach that those who limit their attentive hand also limit their heavenly rewards. Zakat requires us to tend and serve all who are in need, not just humanity. She talks next about their value of unity. There can be no, quote, demarcation between human and nature as disconnected entities or objects. All that is on the earth is interconnected and interdependent. Allah is part of all that exists. Everything that exists is one homogeneous organism, not just some creatures and the Creator, but all of creation and the Creator. Consistent with this Islamic vision of unity, the central doctrine of Sufism is oneness of being. Wow, that's reminding me of the Tao and Confucianism and Buddhism.
Well, yeah, it's also making me think how we've talked about even the beginning of this podcast. We talk about a holistic, interconnected theology, that it's all connected, that it's holistic, that we have to connect the dots in our thinking. And so much of our programming has been to separate and silo ideas so that they're not connected, so that we can do unethical things. And I think if we connect things, it's harder to be unethical. I think it affects your conscience.
Well said, yeah.
Yeah, so continuing on, Here is a prayer from an Egyptian Sufi. O God, I never hearken to the voices of the beasts or the rustle of the trees, the splashing of the waters or the song of the birds, the whistling of the wind or the rumble of the thunder. But I sense in them a testimony to thy unity and a proof of thy incomparability, that thou art the all-prevailing and all-knowing, the all-true.
It is beautiful. The Sufi worldview does not envision physical matter as distinct from the divine. The essential nature of the earth is that of Allah, and he who kills one being kills all of humanity, and he who revives or gives life to one being revives all of humanity. There's power in that.
This next section is titled Afterlife. In Islamic traditions, animals possess an eschatological significance. They too will return to their Lord. The Quran reminds readers that animals participate in both judgment and resurrection.
Oh.
That's interesting, yeah?
Yeah.
Allah has created every entity with his or her own destiny, and at the end of their time, they shall be gathered before their Lord. From Allah all come, and to him shall all things return. There is none in the heavens or earth, but shall return to him in utter submission.
That whole paragraph was quotes directly from the Quran. I keep bringing that up because I think that's significant to know that this is actually straight from their most sacred text.
Scriptures, yeah. And I love this next point. Islamic religious traditions allow that animals have souls. Turkish Sufi master Nursi taught that all souls are eternal. Islamic paradise is full of animals and plants. Creatures will speak directly to God on the day of judgment. Nasser's understanding is consistent with the Quran. He has kept strict count of all his creatures, and one by one they shall approach him on the day of resurrection. And it says that they will speak. It just makes me wonder what animals can understand. And it makes me wonder about the frustration of animals, too. They know more than they can communicate to us.
Yeah.
And in some ways, maybe they're being patient with us. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Perhaps there will be more animals than human beings in paradise. The 9th century theologian Abu Ishaq al-Nazam noted that animals are inherently good and innocent, and so all animals will go to heaven. Allah created a spectacular menagerie of living beings, and humans, this is really good. Allah created a spectacular menagerie of living beings, and human beings will not be lonely in paradise.
The next section is Islamic law and animal rights. The Quran and Hadith are foundational for Islamic law, which is compiled in bodies of written law called Sharia. Sharia reveals the path that parallels the will of the divine and comes from an Arabic word meaning way, as in direction. Sharia originally referred to a path taken by a camel to reach water, and eventually came to be understood as the path of Allah, the guidelines for daily life laid down by Allah. Sharia offers the ideal social blueprint for the good society, informing Muslims of what they may and may not do. Sharia is God's ordaining of the right way for his faithful creatures, providing guidelines that have regulated day-to-day Muslim life for centuries.
Really interestingly, Sharia provides animals with legal rights and explicitly outlines that which humans owe animals. Each being exists by virtue of the truth and is owed its due. Sharia instruction and guidance on animal rights and human obligations are so comprehensive that we need not go elsewhere for any guidance. And then there's a quote from a contemporary Egyptian cleric, Yusuf al-Qaradawi.
The protection of animals' rights found its realization in Sharia as represented in legal textbooks. The idea of animals' rights occupied the minds of medieval Muslim jurists. It is a distinctive characteristic of the Sharia that all animals have legal rights, which must be enforced by the state.
She talks about how there's a group of 10th century Muslim philosophers from Basra, Iraq, and they call themselves the Pure Brethren. And they wrote a story, which is apparently their best known work. The story is called The Case of the Animals versus Man before the King of the Jinn. In this story, animals accuse humans of abuse in court of law. And the animals point out that they roam the earth in peace and harmony before the creation of humans, and they complain that people exploit and destroy the earth and animals, and that they seem to lack, quote, any sense of justice. I just wanted to read a little bit from this. This is really interesting. The animals say, "We were fully occupied in caring for our broods and rearing our young, with all the good food and water God had allotted us, secure and unmolested in our own lands. Night and day we praised and sanctified God and God alone. Ages passed, and God created Adam, father of mankind, and made him his vice-regent on earth. His offspring reproduced, and his seed multiplied. They spread over the earth, land and sea, mountain and plain. Men encroached on our ancestral lands. They captured sheep, cows, horses, mules, and asses from among us and enslaved them, subjecting them to the exhausting toil and drudgery of hauling, being ridden, plowing, drawing water, turning mills. They forced us to these things under duress, with beatings, bludgeonings, and every kind of torture and chastisement our whole lives long. Some of us fled to deserts, wastelands, or mountaintops, but the Adamites pressed after us, hunting us with every kind of wile and device. Whomever fell into their hands was yoked, haltered, and fettered. They slaughtered and flayed him, ripped open his belly, cut off his limbs, and broke his bones, tore out his eyes, plucked his feathers, or sheared off his hair or fleece, and put him into the fire to be cooked, or on the spit to be roasted, or subjected him to even more dire tortures, whose full extent is beyond description."
In response to this indictment, humans malign the furry and feathered plaintiffs who ably defend themselves, vividly describing their fine qualities and special merits. In every case, the animals are the ones providing the rational arguments, in contrast to the humans' arrogant, self-serving, and unjustified claims. The case of the animals versus man reveals Allah's original munificence and suggests that humans have failed to understand or live up to their rightful relations with other species. This story is probably the most extensive critique of mainstream human attitudes towards animals in the entire vast corpus of Muslim literature. Moreover, the Muslim philosophers who composed this text show remarkable empathy for exploited and slaughtered animals, and an understanding that humans often breach Islamic law in their relations with non-humans. This is yet truer with the passing of 1,000 years and with the advent of factory farming, fur farms, animals and entertainment, and animal experimentation.
The fact that this story was written by Muslim philosophers back in the 10th century is really striking to me. Seems very empathetic and compassionate and progressive even.
We were actually reading Carol Adams' book, and in that, reading the history of feminism and vegetarianism, you're thinking, oh, like 150 years ago even, there were very progressive people.
I know.
I think sometimes we think, oh, here we are in the 21st century. We've progressed beyond. No, things haven't really changed much. That's the sad part, really.
Yeah. On the one hand, it's encouraging. Oh, this is not a trend. This is not a trendy way of thinking. This has been around.
Right.
So that's encouraging. But it's discouraging in that, well, where's the progress?
Right. And with factory farming, it's just gotten way worse.
But especially in light of what we already described as maybe a preconceived bias against Islam, this is, like you said at the beginning, this is a refreshing recalibration of what they're all about. Numerous hadiths denounce hunting and or killing for sport or amusement, as well as killing for vanity, such as for ivory, fur, or feathers. Muslims are also forbidden from keeping wild animals as pets and from orchestrating animal fights, such as dog or cockfights, for human entertainment. Islamic theologian Al-Hafiz Bashir Ahmad Masri, a 21st century Muslim, likens such cruel exploitation to pre-Islamic Arab traditions and asserts that Islamic law should be brought to bear on such unholy acts.
Al-Azhar jurists work at the most prestigious institution of Sunni learning in the world, Cairo's venerable Al-Hazaz Seminary, which was founded over 1,000 years ago. These jurists have tremendous power and authority in the Sunni world, which constitutes the vast majority of the Muslim population. In 2004, this venerable institution demonstrated the importance of the subject by hosting a conference on animal rights, at which scholars of Islamic law, history and philosophy, government officials, veterinarians, and animal rescue workers determined that serious improvements were needed in our treatment of animals, most notably in the areas of scientific research and food production. And they encouraged further elaboration of concern for animals from an Islamic perspective.
She has a little section on animal care, and she starts out with a passage describing a lot of similarity between Islam and what we read in the Jewish chapter, that Muslims are required to feed and water animals in their care even before they satisfy their own hunger or thirst. That lines up.
Yeah.
They're also required to offer clean, ample space to domestic animals.
Interesting.
Because Islamic law extends across species, animals in Muslim societies sometimes enjoy protections and guarantees that amaze European visitors. For example, French essayist Michel de Montaigne, 16th century, noted with astonishment that, quote, the Turks have alms and hospitals for animals. Yusuf al-Qaradi notes that organized Islamic efforts on behalf of needy animals predate animal welfare societies in Europe by 1,300 years, making compassionate action an ancient, indeed original part of the Islamic faith.
Wow. Can you believe that?
You know, even when I do like the almanac, and it's so Eurocentric sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh, the very first Animal Welfare Society in England. And then you read something like this. We only focus on European development in the sciences and in scholarship. And then you find out, oh, in the Arab world, that was happening 1,300 years prior.
A Sharia jurist of the 13th century wrote a legal treatise titled Rules for Judgment in the Case of Living Beings, in which he reminds humans of their obligations to animals. Muslims must tend domestic animals even though their days of service have ended, and provide for retired animals exactly as they provide for younger beasts. He further notes that Islamic law requires animals to be housed such that they cannot harm one another. Contemporary factory farms do not honor this requirement, but merely cut off tails and beaks to prevent the worst of physical injuries. Under Islamic law, human beings may not simply cut off beaks or horns or castrate animals to reduce the inevitable harm caused by crowding too many animals into a small space. Nor do factory farms satisfy basic requirements for lodging domestic animals. Sharia forbids Muslims from imprisoning animals in unsuitably cramped conditions, such as sows in furrowing crates or calves in veal crates. Rules for Judgment notes that animals must be kept in quarters that are cleaned regularly and that offer different resting shelters and watering places.
They even have rules for animal care during wartime. They have wartime protections for animals. Universally, when times are difficult, animals under the care of humans often suffer disproportionately. When there is famine, animals are the first to go unfed. When there is a flood, animals are the last to be transported to safety. When there is war, animals too quickly become chattel or targets, their lives expendable amid the overarching violence. This last injustice is addressed directly in Islamic law, which indicates that, quote, our wars are our own problems and that we have no right to make the animals suffer in the course of our violence. The Prophet Muhammad, as recorded in Hadith, instructed Muslims to spare those not engaged in combat.
Islamic law requires Muslims to respect creation even while in combat. Those wielding guns and swords must spare girls and ponies and chickens from the horrors of battle. Let them go their way. Animals are not party to human conflict, and their lives are to be respected. Like all lives, for each life is a gift from Allah.
This is a lot that the Muslims have specifically written about how to care for and how to take care of. And provide for animals. The next section, of course, is diet and hunting also. Sufi stories of saints and mystics are filled with lessons encouraging compassion and a fleshless diet. 12th century Abd al-Karim tells of the awakenings of Ibrahim ibn Adam, a Sufi who enjoyed killing in the form of hunting. 4 times he heard a voice crying, "Awake!" but he steadfastly ignored it. At the 4th cry, he spied a deer and prepared to give chase. However, the deer turned around and spoke to him. "You cannot hunt me. I have been sent to hunt you. Was it for this that you were created? And is this what you have been commanded?" At this last revelation, Ibrahim gave a great cry and made sincere repentance. Many Sufis advocate harmlessness as a principle of faith and are therefore apt to abstain from animal products. She mentions a neighborhood in Istanbul, Turkey. The English translation of the name of their community is non-meat eating. So there's a whole Sufi community in Turkey where people live without consuming flesh.
That's pretty awesome. Rumi's writings suggest that he recognized eating flesh as unnecessary and harmful, even emotionally harmful to animals. He tells the story of a handful of lost travelers who had to decide whether or not to kill an elephant to satisfy their hunger. A sage informed them that there was a plump young elephant in the area that they might eat, but added that if they did so, that youth's parents would in all probability track them out and be revenged on them for killing their offspring. Nonetheless, on sighting the young elephant, the hungry travelers slew the beast. All but one traveler ate of the little pachyderm, but no sooner were they fast asleep than a huge elephant made his appearance and proceeded to smell the breath of each one of the sleepers in turn. Those whom he perceived to have eaten of the young elephant's flesh he slew without mercy, and so only one traveler remained. In this story, Rumi indicates that it is better to be hungry and merciful than well-fed and condemned.
Similarly, followers of the late Sri Lankan Sufi teacher are also vegetarians. This Sufi teacher would ask those who would eat flesh to kill the animal themselves while looking into the animal's eyes, watching the last spark of life fade. He believed that a good heart cannot stand to see the cost of consuming flesh, life giving way to death. If people killed in this way, Muhayyiddin concludes, there would be few eating flesh. She talks a little bit about halal or permissible flesh. And it's interesting, we didn't really get into kosher eating in the Jewish chapter, which is a subject that we've talked about exploring.
Yeah.
But she does talk a little bit about within Islam, there are rules around what can be eaten and what cannot be eaten. Under halal, halal is permissible flesh is taken from the body of an animal who has been kept, tended, killed, and prepared according to the requirements laid out by Islamic law. Some contemporary Muslims note that halal meat producers regularly buy animals from farms that do not treat animals in accordance with Islamic rules. In other words, even halal meat is not really halal, and Muslims must therefore choose other food options.
The basic moral question is, how right is it to deny these creatures of God their natural instincts so that we may eat the end product? For Muslims, these questions pose the additional question of a fundamental moral pertinence. Would our Holy Prophet Muhammad have approved of the modern methods of intensive farming systems if he were alive today? His overwhelming concern for animal rights and their general welfare would certainly have condemned those who practice such methods in the same way as he condemned similar other cruelties in his day. He would have declared that there is no grace or blessing, neither in the consumption of such food nor in the profits from such trades. These are not just hypothetical questions. The cruel and inhumane methods of intensive farming are being practiced in most Islamic countries these days.
While we feed grains to cattle and chickens, hunger is a serious threat for 20% of the world's human population, a disproportionate number of whom are Muslim. Even while so many human beings go permanently malnourished, more than half of all land under cultivation is given over to crops destined for livestock consumption. Raising farmed animals is wasteful and inefficient and is therefore inconsistent with the social justice agenda put forward by Muhammad. The reality of meat production today is that it entails severe environmental degradation and inefficiency, diverts food resources that could be used to nourish hungry humans instead of doomed livestock, even apart from the fact that it condemns millions of innocent creatures to a lifetime of unimaginable torture. Most Muslims, like people everywhere, support the immoral system out of ignorance. She talks about divine-animal relations, about how much Allah is committed to animals, and she focuses on how a lot of the Islamic texts speak of animals praising God in their own way. There's a prayer written by Yunus Emre of Turkey, who lived in the early 14th century. He pens a message to Allah in which he expresses his desire to join the voices of animals and the natural world in praising Allah. It's really nice. He writes, "I wish to call you in the mountains amidst the rocks, with the birds in the cities, with the fish in the depths of the seas, with the gazelles in the plains, with the doves which sing, in the songs of nightingales, and through the voices of those who love you and call you, I want to call you God." She also writes how Muslims say that every time you kill an animal, you are decreasing or diminishing the praise being given to Allah, which is an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Prophet Muhammad rebuked a man who burned an entire anthill simply because he was stung by one ant, saying, quote, "Because an ant stung you, you have destroyed a whole nation that celebrates God's glory. In destroying a species, we are in reality silencing a whole class of God's worshipers." And for a Muslim, it would seem difficult to find a more compelling reason than this to protect habitat, species, and individual animals, including farmed animals. And then, of course, she talks about how they see animals as individuals.
Animals are understood to be unique individuals in Islamic traditions. Islamic sacred writings present animals as having feelings and interests of their own. Animals communicate among themselves, understand each other, and even worship Allah in their own unique way, which Allah has given them.
I love this story she writes, or she relates here. Rumi writes of a parrot unhappily exploited by a merchant, trapped in a cage, intelligent and very much remembering his previous and now distant bird community. When the man who held the bird captive planned a trip to the parrot's homeland, he asked his prisoner if he had any message for his kin back home. The parrot asked the merchant to tell them that he was kept confined in a cage. When the selfish man delivered this message, a parrot immediately fell down dead, and the merchant was annoyed with his own parrot for having sent such a fatal message. As a result, he returned to rebuke the caged bird, but no sooner had he told the little trapped bird what had happened than his prisoner fell onto the cage floor. The merchant, after lamenting his death, took his corpse out of the cage and threw it away. But to his surprise, the corpse immediately recovered life and flew away. As the bird lifted up into the skies, free from human bars, he explained to the self-centered man how his relative and friend from afar had, quote, feigned death to suggest this way of escaping from confinement. This story reveals an individual bird's desire to be autonomous, to live out his or her natural life with his own community, and the flock's ability to reason and communicate. I think seeing any animal in a cage is sad, but for some reason, a bird trapped in a little cage is very, very sad.
I just saw a social media piece where a bald eagle was let out of a cage during a football game or something. And of course, it flies around this stadium and everyone's cheering that there's a bald eagle flying. And it has ribbons on its talons. And of course, it comes back to its handler. It's just really sad to see, but it's just the whole crowd cheering, oh my God, there's a bald eagle. But this poor eagle, it's pretty sad because it's in this cage. They let it out. It does its thing, and then it goes back in its cage.
She talks about animal powers within Islamic thought.
Rumi found in animals a natural God-given instinct, unobscured by human intellect and false imaginings. Most important, Rumi attributes to animals the critical ability to love intuitively without confusion, to feel and express loving devotion, a trait that Sufis admire greatly. In this way, Rumi presents animals as standing closer to Allah than do most humans, and therefore as holding a special knowledge of the divine. If only creatures had tongues, they could lift the veil from the divine mysteries. That came up earlier, like if animals could talk, or that animals in the resurrection, in the judgment and resurrection, animals will talk. It'll be fascinating to be present for that.
I love this, that animals love intuitively without confusion. They're able to feel and express loving devotion. I mean, when an animal loves you, there's really no doubt about it. All right, let's get into Islamic traditions and animal liberation. Islam is not merely a system of belief, but a way of living and being. For Muslims, the truth cannot be merely spoken or simply brought to mental awareness. The teachings of Islam must be fully known through realization in action. Muhammad said that Allah looks to and values both our hearts and deeds. The Prophet noted that each of us is a vendor of his or her soul, either freeing it or bringing about its ruin through our daily choices. Indeed, Muslims advocating on behalf of animals have assembled all over the Muslim world, from Egypt, Jordan, and Syria to Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, Malaysia, and Indonesia, as well as in North America and Europe. PETA member Ali Robert Tapan, now a graduate student in Islamic studies, introduced a website on Islam and vegetarianism in 1998 with the following statement: "The purpose of this site is to show what many Muslims have long suspected: eating meat, dairy products, and eggs conflicts with Islamic teachings of kindness to animals. Not only that, animal industries are responsible for vast environmental pollution and destruction and also contribute to many deadly human diseases." And this site, which is much frequented, is called Islamic Concern for Animals. And I did look that up yesterday, and it's still a functioning site.
That's awesome.
It's really cool to see Muslims contributing to this site from all over the world.
With more and more Muslims concerned about our treatment of animals, much impassioned dialogue has centered on diet, both on websites and in the larger Islamic community. There have even been several fatwas, or scholarly opinions, offered on the permissibility of the vegetarian diet. Enlightened Islamic doctors support vegetarianism, even noting that our prophet was mostly vegetarian. For example, Dr. Monaim A. Fadali, author of Animal Experimentation, A Harvest of Shame, writes, "Islam, a religion of compassion and moderation, acknowledges animals' rights and emphasizes humans' responsibility for their welfare. A vegan-vegetarian diet is healthful, promotes mental and physical well-being, and is cruelty-free. It does not include animal parts or products, such as eggs and dairy products. I urge every Muslim and non-Muslim to become a vegan-vegetarian."
It's interesting that they have a statement there. Our prophet was mostly vegetarian, too. And then she goes on to name 3 more specific Muslim activists. She starts out with the late Islamic theologian Al-Hafiz Bashir Ahmad Masri. He's unquestionably the most prominent contemporary voice in articulating Islamic concern for non-human animals. He lived from 1914 to 1992. He did a lot. She has a few pages describing all the things that he did for animals. But he worked with both the World Society for the Protection of Animals and Compassion in World Farming until his death in 1992. He was well known for his radio and television broadcasts, lectures, and writings on the subject of animals and Islam. Between 1984 and 1992, Masri wrote Islamic Concern for Animals, a pioneering and groundbreaking philosophical book followed by his more comprehensive animal welfare in Islam. And then he produced a powerful video, Creatures of God. He specifically focused on animals used in scientific research. He wrote, "Think of the millions of animals killed in the name of commercial enterprises in order to supply a complacent public with trinkets and products they do not really need. And why? Because people are too lazy or self-indulgent to find substitutes or do without." He notes that we now have a host of preferable options with which to replace animal models. He reminds readers that life is not ours but Allah's, and scientific research, quote, "that is unlawful on humans ought to be unlawful on animals." The second activist that she talks about is very interesting. This is Egyptian Muslim Nadia Montasser. She works with a handful of different organizations on behalf of animal liberation. She works with PETA, Egyptian Society for Animal Friends, Society for Protection of Animal Rights in Egypt, and Egyptian Society for Mercy on Animals. She explains her dedication to animal liberation through her Islamic faith. If we have dominion over animals, surely it is to protect them, not to use them for our own ends. There is nothing in the Quran, nor in the Bible, that would justify our modern-day programs that desecrate the environment, destroy entire species of wildlife, and inflict torment and death on billions of animals. A loving God could not help but be appalled at the way animals are being treated. In light of contemporary animal industries and the sad plight of many exploited and neglected animals, Montasser feels that one of her tasks as a Muslim is to make this a better place for all beings and to alleviate suffering. Montasser writes, "The Holy Prophet once said to a man who was sharpening his knife in the presence of the animal, quote, 'Do you intend inflicting death on the animal twice? Once by sharpening the knife within his sight and once by cutting his throat?' When Muhammad migrated from Mecca to Medina, people there used to cut off camels' humps and fat tails of sheep. They used to eat those while the animals remained alive for future use. He ordered them to stop these barbaric actions."
Montasser writes, "We Muslims tend to ignore the rules that govern whether meat is halal or not. Simply because we want to eat meat and we've been accustomed to eating meat, we need to ask ourselves whether this meat is halal or not." And she gives these 8 principles, or 8 points. 1. Has your sheep been cruelly transported or handled or dragged before slaughter? 2. Has your sheep been starving or thirsty before slaughter? 3. Has your sheep been blindfolded before or during slaughter? 4. Has any other animal been slaughtered in the presence of your sheep? 5. Has there been blood of other animals in the place of slaughter? 6. Did your butcher sharpen his knife in the presence of your sheep? 7. Did the butcher slaughter your sheep slowly, such that it felt pain? 8. Did the butcher skin or dismember any organ off the body of your sheep while there was still movement in its body after slaughter? If your answer to any of the previous questions is yes, then this meat is not halal, according to Islamic Sharia.
Her point is clear. Muslims who wish to comply with halal requirements will need to do some extensive research into where their food comes from and or choose a vegan diet.
That seems easier, doesn't it?
It seems
Just going
easier.
vegan. It seems way easier.
The last person she talks about is Azam Siddiqui, a Muslim from northeastern India who has done a lot of work, extensive work on behalf of elephants. And I think I'll just read a quote from him. "I raise my voice when I see injustice happening to any species. Humans can demonstrate, shout, and make others understand mistreatment meted against them. But animals, unfortunately, cannot. It is this weakness of the animals that perhaps has allowed me to focus more on animal rights than human rights."
All right. Kemmer's summary for this chapter. Islamic religious traditions hold much of what is recorded in Jewish and Christian scriptures as sacred. Islamic sacred writings reveal all of nature, all animals as created and tended by Allah, and destined to be drawn back to the divine. Sacred writings reveal a compassionate creator. Muhammad models kindness. As vice-regents, Muslims are expected to be merciful and compassionate. In Islamic religious traditions, the role of Muslims is one of submission and service to Allah, of tending creation on behalf of the Creator. Each living being is an individual in the Islamic worldview, a devoted servant of Allah, living in her or his separate yet similar community. While we have no rights over other creatures, animals are granted rights under Islamic law, such as freedom from cruelty and protection during times of war.
Yeah, I'm impressed. There's a lot of writing in Islamic sacred texts that are very specific about being kind and considerate.
It is refreshing to see this angle of Islam.
Yeah.
Something that I think many of us are unaware of. And I guess I think of the research that Dr. Kemmerer did.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
It's an ambitious book.
it is. Because to be able to distill all of this thought, it takes a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's very impressive. We will do another episode covering the conclusion and appendix, the powerful appendix. And
Yeah.
if you recall, in the introduction, she was like, please read all the way through the appendix.
Right.
Before you make any decisions about this book, please read the appendix. So it's a very important part of the book that we'll discuss. And then we'll have our interview episode.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for coming along, for listening, and have a wonderful day.
Yeah. Peace.